In this video, we're going to cover the steps necessary to create a Bitcoin node, Bitcoin Core full node running on Microsoft Azure. Now, to do this, step one, so to speak, I first need to create an identity. As this node is going to be running in the cloud, Microsoft's cloud, publicly accessible, potentially publicly accessible, we want to be as secure as we can possibly be. So I don't want to be logging into this node with simple username and password. I want to take some steps to be ultra secure here, to really minimize the potential for things like brute force attacks on this node. So step one, a long way around to getting to step one, but let's create an identity. I'm going to use a utility on Linux in this case. It's also available on the Mac by default called SSH Keygen. And the first parameter to this is the bit width of the key. Second parameter is the type of key. That's going to be RSA, and I need to specify the file name that I want to use for this identity. I'll call it IDRSA Azure, and actually I want to store this in the right location, so I'm going to store this in my home directory. Right. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. No passphrase, and that's now created. And so now I have a key pair. An identity is also referred to as a key pair. You'll hear me use those terms interchangeably, very likely. I have my key pair. I can show you where those files are. The .pub extension indicates the public key. The corresponding file without an extension is my private key. Public key I can safely show to anybody and place anywhere I need to place for whatever I'm doing. With that in mind, this public key needs to be supplied to the virtual machine creation process on Azure. So I'm going to do paste buffer copy. Not found. All right, as I was saying, we'll take a little detour here. I was describing the pb copy command, paste buffer copy command, but it turns out on Fedora that's not a thing. So I have created an alias for it using the xcell command, and you can see that on my screen. So I've executed that. I've gotten the contents of that .pub file, so the contents of my public key now exists on the system's clipboard. Now I'm going to move over to Azure. And so here in the Azure portal, you can see that I've got nothing going on here. This is a brand new account. Nothing new. Or nothing pre-existing, I should say. So now I want to create a virtual machine. Very simple. Love the user interface here. Microsoft has always done a great job of providing us with great user experiences. visually anyway. So I've started out here home upon logging in at my dashboard here. Again, nothing going on. I'm going to move down to virtual machines and I'm going to add one. Alright, and this is simple enough. I'm going to create a new resource group. Give my virtual machine a name. Its location will be in the eastern US. I'm going to base this on Ubuntu Server 1604. 2 CPUs, 8 gig of memory is fine. And here, as I said, I'm not going to be using a simple password. I want to use a public key. So I'm going to give Azure the username that I want to use to log on to this system. And now I'm going to paste my public key in here, as well as specify some firewall ports. And at this time, the only thing I want to be able to do is SSH. Okay. Let's go to disks next. Default premium HD or premium SSD is fine. As the Bitcoin blockchain is over 300 gig in size at this point in time, I need to attach a new disk to this VM to give it a destination upon which we can store the disk image that will represent the blockchain. Turns out that this will also be the storage location for our system wallet and anything relative to Bitcoin, as it turns out. So I'll go ahead and attach a new disk. I'm going to set this to a standard SSD. 1 terabyte is fine. And I'm going to click OK here. And everything else is good to go. So we're going to go ahead and create this guy. Alright, validation has passed. All looks good. Go ahead and create. Alright, deployment underway. Usually this proceeds pretty quickly, so we'll go ahead and wait for it. Go back over to my virtual machines list. Should be able to see that drop in here any moment now. Alright, we've got a refresh here. The status of our machine is creating, so we'll wait for that. Hopefully it doesn't take too long. Go ahead and click on this to see some details here. Alright, I already have a public IP, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that to the clipboard. And while we wait for this to finish, I'm going to show you something else. I need to specify here on the local machine what certificate I want to use when I connect to this remote node. So I'll give you a little refresher here. As I look at the contents of my certificates directory, my SSH directory, I'm going to add a file here. I'm going to call it config. In this file, I can specify those certificates, those private keys that I would like to use when connecting to various hosts. So we're going to start in this manner. So I specify the host redundantly, the host name, and in the identity file field I point to the location on disk of the private key. Go ahead and save that. And now checking on our creation progress. Still creating. How about we refresh this? Alright. So our virtual machine is running in Azure, and now I'm going to try to connect to it. The username that we wanted to use was Bitcoin. Aha. So the ownership on my config file is not what it needs to be. Change that. Try our connection again. I'm going to say yes. So go ahead and add this fingerprint. We are now connected. Alright, cool. Now what? So we've got a bunch of volumes mounted here, but you'll notice none of them is representative of that 1 terabyte disk that we chose to add to the machine. So what do we do now? Well, let's make sure that that disk has indeed been attached to this VM. To do that, we'll list all block storage on the endpoint. And we do see that SDC clearly looks like it is a 1 terabyte volume, but it doesn't have any partitions on it, so it's not usable at this point. Let's change that. The first thing that we need to do is to put a partition on it. To do that, I'm going to use fdisk. And I want to add a new partition. It'll be a primary partition. Number 1, we'll start at 2048 sector and take it to the end. All the defaults there are great, and we will go ahead and write this to disk and exit the fdisk utility. Listing all block storage again, we now see that SDC has a partition on it. With that in place, we now need to put a file system on that partition. To do that, we'll do mkfs.ext4 and specify the partition that we want to put the file system on. Okay, and that's now complete. Alright, but you notice it is still not mounted, which is expected. So now we have a storage repository that we'll be able to use for our full node. How do we get it into a position that we can actually use it? Well, what I want to do is within my home directory, I want to mount that partition on the default hidden directory that the Bitcoin daemon typically uses. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to create that hidden directory first. And that directory name is .bitcoin. So go ahead and make that. And let's list all entries in my home directory, and we can see that the Bitcoin hidden directory is there, and its ownership is representative of me. I'm currently logged in as Bitcoin, as you will recall. Now, I'm going to go ahead and mount that new partition on .bitcoin. Take a look at everything again. What you'll notice now is that because of the way that I have to mount volumes on this machine, the ownership of .bitcoin has now changed. Because I used sudo, the ownership of the .bitcoin directory is now set to root. Now, if I don't change that at the time that I go to launch the Bitcoin daemon, it will fail due to a permissions problem. So let's change the ownership of .bitcoin. And we'll make sure that it is effective for anything within the .bitcoin hierarchy, including .bitcoin itself. Do that. always reverse those. All right. With that out of the way, we've changed our ownership, and now Bitcoin now owns that directory. And so now, if we take a look at all mounted volumes, we see that we have SDC1 mounted on home Bitcoin.Bitcoin. A nice healthy 956 gigabytes available for us. Very cool. Step 1 complete. We have created a VM. We have created a user account. And at the same time, we set that VM and user account to be authenticated via digital certificates. No passwords in this game. We have also created an additional storage location. We've mounted that storage location on .bitcoin within our home folder. Now I will wrap the video here, as we are probably over 20 minutes at this point. And in the next segment, we will go ahead and set this node up so that it can run the Bitcoin Core process. The next video will demonstrate the easy method of installing Bitcoin Core. And in a future video, we will go through the process of actually compiling the source for Bitcoin Core, which is actually the preferred method. That way you know what you're getting. Having the opportunity to download the source from GitHub, compile it yourself, and go through that whole process, you know that the binaries are legit, so to speak. It takes a little while for that process to complete, but from a security standpoint, you have a lot of assurances by going that route. All right. Thank you for watching. Hopefully this has been informative so far. Please continue in the series to complete your education, as it were, and you will see me in the next one. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way you get notifications when I post videos. I try to do it a couple times a week. This is a new channel as I move all of my social media identities to Ron Code Jr.